We are back. This is episode number 78 of Kalibrated with Scott. I'm Scott, of course. We have a lot to jump into today, so I'm just going to get right into it with our frontline update. I'm going to move over to our map. You can see here we have the map that I have created for the SMO. Just for reference, again, color-wise, green is territory that has been confirmed by geolocations. Purple is territory that is assumed controlled by the Russians. However, we do not have geolocations in this area to prove that, but just based off common sense and frontline reports, we can kind of, adjust the front lines necessarily. So, and red is full Russian control. I'm going to start down in Kherson because that's an area that is often talked about. This bridgehead that the Ukrainians hold across the Dnieper River, right here you can see no progress has been made outside of this little village. The Ukrainians mostly operate in this delta area right here off the river, and then sometimes come into this completely destroyed city. I mean, there's just nothing left. So once again, no real progress for the Ukrainians on this sector of the map. However, I want you guys to remember this sector of the map because it kind of plays into something I'm going to talk about a little later. Over to Robitny. Let's see. Too far, right here. The Russians have made a little bit of progress outside of Novopopivka up towards Robitny. You can see this area right here, this little forest plantation, and this area over here is actually one major Russian defense structure that was captured by the Ukrainians in the previous counteroffensive. However, the Russians have now moved back into this part. It's divided by the road. Literally, the trenches come right up to the road and then cross the road and go into here. So the Russians control this half, the Ukrainians control this half. And other than that, there has been no real movement in this area of the map. And again, this will play into something I'm going to talk about a little later. Moving up to Novomihайлivka, we have a confirmed Russian advance towards the settlement. This is quite a big deal. This area of the map does not experience a ton of movement. And this town right here is key to further cutting off supply to Vuhledar. So if Novomihайлivka falls, this area is pretty open. It's very hard to keep supplied and defended. The Russians will probably capitalize on that and move into this area, and then Vuhledar's days are numbered. So that's what we're looking at down here. Marinka, the situation is still basically the same. We have another Russian flag that was planted in this area, I do believe. Let's see, Russian flag in Marinka, yeah. So there have been two flags positioned right here. For all intensive purposes, Marinka has fallen to the Russians. There's still this area right here that's in the gray zone. It's completely destroyed, but yeah. So, the Ukrainians have pulled back towards Harlivka right here, and we'll just see how that progresses over the next coming days. On the Avdiivka front, we have a confirmed Russian advance around Stepove. This one was kind of like an obvious one. However, we did not have geolocations, and this tree line is a pretty solid defensive fortification for the Ukrainians in this area of the map. So now we have geolocation of the Russians in this area. This area has been added to the map, and it is significant because it further puts pressure on Stepove, which is a critical juncture for the AFU in defending the Avdiivka coke plant and the 0542 highway that runs into Avdiivka, which is the main supply route. Down in the southern area of the map, we have a suspected Russian advance into Avdiivka. This has not been confirmed yet, but we have multiple trusted sources talking about this advance. saying that the fighting has actually begun in the city of Avdiivka. This is what they consider kind of the dividing line right here. This industrial zone is not technically included in Avdiivka's city limits, at least for the Russians, it's not. And with this development right here, further development into this area is likely. Once this area has development, this entire pocket will close. As of right now, we have this under Ukrainian control because we have seen no footage from this area. But if you look at this salient that is developing here, I don't imagine the Ukrainians will sit here very long, especially considering that this right here is kind of the high ground. A point of correction, in my last video, I said that this was a waste heap, which is not totally correct. What I was referring to is the outside of this quarry. Obviously, this area is the lowest area around, around here because of its because of what it was used for. It's a quarry, right? So there's water down. You can see in the bottom. What I was referring to was the outside of this hill, which is a high elevation point for this entire area. So right around here, the elevation is much higher. And if you look at topographical map, you can see that. But this is another bad development for the Ukrainians. The Russian Telegram channels in this area are talking about Ukrainian lines just basically collapsing. The 47th, which had been moved into Avdiivka to hold, is seemingly burnt out and needs rotation, and there are refusals to fight. So probably more to come from this city in the coming days. Moving up to Bakhmut. Down in this Klishchivka salient, we haven't had much news from here at all. I believe that after the Russians secured the height and this trench fortification here, they went on a operational pause just to rest up and refit before the next set of assaults and so on. So this pocket hasn't changed very much, but in the coming days and weeks, I do expect this pocket to be under severe stress and likely be pulled back from. This area has not been marked yet because we have no visual confirmation and no solid idea about where the progress is coming from. But there are significant reports that the Ukrainians have pulled out of basically this entire area right here and have moved back into this tree line to hold more defensive positions, and likely like this tree line right here. So this area is now either in the gray zone or under Russian control, and that means that the Russians are pushing up on Ivanivsky. That means that the control over this fortification down here will not be in danger, and the lines are probably out here more or less. So that's a pretty big development. Up here, around Bogdanivka and Kromove, we have the Russians have pushed out. They're now into the motocross track. It's a dirt bike track or off-road vehicle track, which is now further than Wagner has ever progressed outside of Bakhmut. So now the Russian military has made it past where Wagner had made it. If you remember, Wagner had come down into this area from the north, but had never pushed into Kromove or this massive fortification that's in this area. So this is another significant set of progress. You can see the Russians are doing the same thing that the Ukrainian or that Wagner did. They follow the railroads and they make progress along this railroad. It's a high ground area and the ground is solid, so it makes movement much easier for the Russians. There's also reports that fighting is now about here in Bogdanivka, so they have entrenched themselves pretty significantly in the town and have a foothold. Those updates will be coming as soon as we get more confirmation. Remember, this map is very conservative and is based off of geolocation, so you're not going to see ginormous massive updates. You're going to see slow progression of the map as proof and evidence come out. Just to the east of Vesel here, we have Russian progress once again up the railroad line right here. The Russians like to do that. Usually they're covered in trees and the Russians can just kind of move along them up into this area. I don't exactly know how this salient looks. So far, we only have confirmation of the Russians moving up this way. So I'm not going to expand this out. However, this puts multiple areas for the Ukrainians into a difficult position. Right here, you have Berestove, you have Visel, and then Sporne, which if there's any Russian progress to the north, this whole area becomes a massive salient and will present a massive problem for the AFU. Up here, Bielorivka area and the Shibyansky Forestry, we have a confirmed Russian advance based off of drone footage of a Russian assault. That progress shows something like this around this territory. However, we can probably assume that if the Russians are assaulting here, they have positions in here. We just don't have the visual proof of that right now, so no map changes will come around that. We have more progress towards Terni here. So this whole salient is something that I expect to be difficult for the Ukrainians to hold over the coming weeks. I expect them to set up defensive lines along this river right here and these little lakes, just because this area is not really serving any purpose. If you guys remember, earlier, the goal was to reach Kremenna, which never actually occurred for the Ukrainians. They got pretty far up in this forestry, but were never able to make it actually to the city. This was another major goal after Liman fell, and they just never achieved success to making it there. And this was sort of the turning point in the war from when the Russians were on the back foot and the Ukrainians had a massive amount of initiative to the front line stabilizing, the Russians catching back up, and now the Russians have full initiative. Up here in Sinkivka, I actually moved the map back a little bit. There was a sizable Ukrainian counterattack to remove the Russian presence from Sinkivka. They still sit on the outside. The force commitment in this area is very significant. The Ukrainians do not want to lose this bridgehead. Although it's not really doing much for the Ukrainians right now, I just think they're going to be put in a more difficult position if Kupiansk is taken, if the Russians can get on this side of the river, because there's just not the defensive fortifications in the Kharkov region to support an AFU defense against a massive Russian push throughout the entirety of the Kharkov region. I think that this area is of hyper focus and they want to keep it. I'm going to now talk about something related to this map and related to the situation in Ukraine. So Zelensky came out the other day and basically said that the AFU and the Ukrainian military is now on a defensive posture. So we knew this because the counteroffensive had failed, and obviously the Russians are progressing all over the map, making more progress than they have in a year at least, since basically Kiev. We haven't seen progress this quick coming all over the map. So the Ukrainians are talking about setting up defensive fortifications now because they're on the defense. I imagine they probably mean building up defensive fortifications around Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, all along this front line, but not in the areas where the Russians are already fighting. So Chasiv Yar, yes, but Ivanivsky, no, Bogdanivka, no, Avdiivka, Kleshchiivka, no. It's further back. And what this and then the Ukrainians came out and they were also talking about making tactical retreats. Syrskyi had a quote saying that the Ukrainians were going to have to pull back from certain positions to conserve manpower. So I've been making jokes about goodwill gestures and difficult decisions coming, and that's what I wanted to talk about right now. And the legitimacy of these claims. So I had mentioned this, what I call the Terni bridgehead right here. this area is likely to be one of the areas seceded if this is a genuine claim by the AFU that they are backing up. This bridgehead is just difficult to maintain. There's a much more defensive barrier along that river, like I said, and along these lakes. You just move back a little bit. The Russians, are going to move into the forestry because it's going to be almost impossible to keep supplied over the river. And really, this area is not benefiting the Ukrainians. They're just losing manpower. They have artillery committed to the region, and it's just not going to benefit them in any way. Another area we could see that is Bilohorivka. The commander for the AFU in the Seversk area is very competent and has done a great job. We've seen almost no movement in this sector for a long time. So I don't necessarily know if this area is going to see any withdrawals, but I mean, you can just see the difficulty in holding a salient like this around Bilohorivka. The Ukrainians lose a lot of men around here. Another salient is now developing down here in Sporne. So I could see a Ukrainian withdrawal to this Seversk line and then defending this area right here. Down in Bakhmut, obviously the Klestchivka salient right here is what I would consider a pullback area. Also Bogdanivka backing up, probably Ivanivsky. I would probably let go of Ivanivsky because it just doesn't really support anything anymore. Chasiv Yar is now the main supply route into Ivanivsky. This town could be enveloped very quickly once this area collapses, which it's about to. And if progress is made on the south, Ivanivsky gets put in a difficult situation. It only has one supply road. This would be a very realistic withdrawal to set up a defensive line along the high ground and canal of Chasiv Yar. Down here in Avdiivka, this whole salient could be removed. The Ukrainians could remove themselves from this area and set up a new defensive line back over here. I don't know if the Ukrainians want to do that. If you look at a map, this area is kind of barren. There's kind of actually quite a large area right here that just doesn't have a lot of defense. So if Avdiivka falls, if New York falls, this whole area is pretty undefended and could be exploited by the Russians in the coming days and weeks, or weeks and months, I guess, more realistically. But an AFU withdrawal from Avdiivka right now would just conserve manpower. The Russians have already broken through the fortifications here and here. Everything else is just going to be bloody urban fighting in a salient, and that's not really what you want, especially if the Russians force some sort of breakthrough up around the Avdiivka coke plant or over Stepove in this area and cut off the line of supply. You have a lot of men trapped that will be running through fields getting shelled. So we may see something like that. Another area that the Ukrainians will probably have to back off of is Pervomaisky, back up, create a new defensive line around this area. And then the final one is Novomikhailivka and backing up to Konstantinivka right here. The other Konstantinivka. There are a number of pockets here that the Ukrainians should probably back out of because they're just not benefiting Ukraine in any significant way. Another one would be Robitny right here. This salient is just bleeding manpower for the Ukrainians. They could just reset to where they were before the counteroffensive. They had good defensive lines up here, and then they would not be expending manpower trying to hold that salient. And the last one, and the one I wanted you to remember, was Krinky. And this is a topic I want to discuss real fast. So with this declaration by Ukrainian leadership that the AFU is going to retreat, it comes with it some expectations. And one of the expectations is that the Ukrainians are going to remove themselves from areas that are causing unnecessary bleed, right? They have not left cranky yet. This salient is doing nothing for the Ukrainians. The manpower expenditure may be small enough that they don't feel the need to actually stop operations here just because it's not really costing them as much. However, we have seen consistent artillery, counter battery fire, and lancet strikes in this entire area. Ukraine is bleeding a lot of artillery to the Russians around here, trying to just support this bridgehead with fire support. So when it comes to Ukrainian claims, I always like to think, why are they telling me this? They never reveal their true intentions. They lie quite frequently. So trying to see through what they're doing is part of the challenge. And what I actually think is going on here is not any tactical withdrawals. I think that the Ukrainians are just getting beat on every single front right now. And a way to excuse that loss of territory is by making it seem like you're allowing it, saying we're backing up, we're on the retreat, we're setting up better defensive lines, we're positioning ourselves better. That would be the correct thing to do, right? That's what the Ukrainians should be doing. But instead of that, they are holding places like Avdiivka, holding places like this pocket around Kleshchiivka at all costs. They're trying to counterattack in areas. They're counterattacking up in Kharkov. They're counterattacking still around Stepove. They're holding every single inch still. I have yet to see a Ukrainian withdrawal. The only thing I've seen is routes. I've seen, Ukrainian soldiers being captured. We have very real conversations about ammunition shortages, especially around Bakhmut. The guns are almost silent. And now there's very, very, very real conversations going on about a complete 155 artillery shell shortage on major sections of the front, which is a huge detriment to AFU defense. And, they're just, I see it as just a way to excuse the loss of territory that we are going to see. I do believe Avdiivka will fall before the winter. The situation in the city is crumbling very fast. The AFU in this area are extremely exhausted. And just in general, the AFU across the entire board is extremely exhausted. So on top of this talk about defensive posturing, there has been also a major shift in rhetoric coming out of the West. I think that there is a very split idea about what to do with Ukraine right now. Obviously, the funding still has not made it through. I believe Zelensky is slated to speak today. He is in Washington right now. And he's there to beg for weapons and money. So we'll see if that ends up happening. But we saw a very interesting event occur the other day, and this is something that I wanted to touch on. At the Argentinian president's inauguration, which, whatever you think about the new president of Argentina, it's neither here nor there. Zelensky was very conveniently and awkwardly sat near Viktor Orban. I'm sure it was intentional. And as this inauguration progressed and after it was over, we got pictures of Zelensky basically somewhat cornering Viktor Orban and forcing him to have a discussion on Ukraine. It looked very tense. Zelensky had his Coke jaw sort of thing going a little bit, like he always does. It's very odd to look at, but it is what it is. And the conversation did not look overly pleasant. And this speaks to an issue that Ukraine has had, and will continue to have. The leadership of Ukraine has been babied and carried throughout this entire conflict. Basically, since 2014, Ukrainian leadership has been handpicked by the West for the reason of continuing this Ukraine project. And what happens when you put people in that are really good listeners, or okay listeners, I guess, in Ukraine's case, but they listen, they do what you say, they follow your playbook. Is that you do not have experienced, well-rounded politicians in positions that are very, very, very important for international diplomacy. And Zelensky is kind of a clown when it comes to this. He is shooting himself in the foot with these sort of antics. The blackmail has begun, the blackmail of Europe. A lot of the pro-Ukrainian accounts are talking about just basically blackmailing Europe into giving them equipment and money. And you see it quite frequently with the talks of, the Russians are going to invade after they're done with us. Schrodinger's Russia is the second army in Russia, or the second army in Ukraine, but still about to invade NATO. It's a ridiculous sentiment, and the Ukrainians are really pushing this hard now. They're talking about massive forced immigration of Ukrainians into the EU, which is another way of blackmailing for money. Keep the money flowing, or we're going to send all of our poor and impoverished people to your neck of the woods. And I think it's not being received very well in Europe. I think that a lot of the Eastern European countries are not, overly ecstatic about this, and it's starting to show. And this episode with Viktor Orban, obviously they're not on good terms, but going up and cornering somebody and then talking to them and forcing that conversation is, you're not messing with, Zelensky is not going to intimidate Viktor Orban. The dude is a lifelong politician. He's dealt with idiots before. He'll deal with idiots again. And it just really shows the immaturity and the inexperience of the Ukrainian leadership. We see it all the time. They have horrible, horrible track record with diplomacy. They can't get stuff done that they need to get done. And it's probably one of the biggest faltering issues that Ukraine is dealing with right now is its inability to conduct meaningful foreign diplomacy and enact foreign policy the way that they need to. If you look at Russia has Lavrov, who has done an amazing job throughout this entire SMO. I think he is one of the underrated individuals. Putin is doing his job. I can't speak to how well Putin is doing because I don't know what decisions he's making exactly. But when it comes to the foreign policy of Russia, that is handled by Lavrov, and he is doing it extremely well. He's putting on a masterclass, really. And that's the kind of leadership that you need in Ukraine. That's the kind of leadership that we need here in America, and we just don't have it. So the clowns are running the show. They continue to run the show, and they're running the show into the ground. And I expect that to continue. We have some other updates that I just wanted to touch on from around the world. There was I think it's Norwegian tanker. One of the Nordic countries had a oil tanker that has just been struck by the Houthi rebels from Yemen. They hit it with a cruise missile or an anti-ship missile. I'm not sure which one it was, and it caught fire and it was currently burning. I'll put a picture of it up right here so you can see what I'm talking about. And this is the fourth or fifth attack on shipping vessels that are heading to Israel by the Houthi rebels. This is a major, major deal. Threatening international shipping lanes is a very, very serious offense. It affects everybody. It makes prices rise everywhere, and it can be extremely detrimental or extremely effective. The Iranians have a plan to cut off the Strait of Hormuz, which is where a lot of the world's oil flows through. And that would be, an extreme detriment to areas around the world. And we're seeing the Houthis do the same thing in the Red Sea, where they are hitting and capturing Israeli labeled ships. So ships heading to Israel under any nationality are now a target. I do believe we are going to see an Israeli-U.S. Union in this region to counter this Houthi action. How successful that will be, time will tell. And another area I wanted to talk about was Venezuela. Venezuela has now annexed the Guyana region. I think I'm saying that right. They had a vote. It was 97 some percent in favor of the region, which was formerly part of Venezuela, coming back into Venezuela. It is quite a substantial chunk of Guyana, and it is oil rich. The reason why all of this is happening is because oil was just discovered offshore. So that's a significant development, and I think the most important aspect of this is the U.S. response. The U.S. is in a position where they were just in Venezuela, basically begging for oil. The Venezuelans they're in a position of strength. The U.S. is in a major position of weakness, dealing with the Ukraine war, dealing with the Houthis in Yemen, keeping Israel supplied. They are stretched extremely thin right now. And the response to this annexation, to this rhetoric coming out of Venezuela, has been extremely underwhelming from the U.S. Usually you would go park a U.S. aircraft carrier off the coast, and that would be that. So far, the U.S. has announced some exercises in the region, but nothing of any major significance. We'll see if the Venezuelans keep on this track, but the U.S. is not the empire that it used to be. Back in the day, if the Houthis were striking shipping vessels, they would be getting struck back in no time. If Venezuela was annexing territory, honestly, it probably wouldn't even try to annex that territory in the first place. But now that the U.S. is distracted and overwhelmed, other countries are now taking advantage of that. And you're just starting to begin to see this multipolar world develop. And I don't want people to get the wrong idea about what that means. The U.S. still plays an important part in the multipolar world. It's just not a hegemony. So the U.S. is now getting put further and further into its place, and the rest of the world is kind of coming out of its shell and moving on. And I think that can best be seen by the recent meeting between the Putin and the president of UAE and MBS in Saudi Arabia, and that is the very, very gleeful handshakes and cheerful nature of these meetings show that Putin is not isolated. The world is not against Russia. The world is against hegemony. And I think that everybody kind of is in agreement that needs to end, except the United States, and the U.S. is gripping onto that with everything it has. Other than that, that's all I wanted to talk about today. Thank you so much. If you guys like my work and you want to support me, you can do so on Patreon. If you go onto my Patreon and support me there, you will be able to ask questions at any time that will be answered on air. I have no questions for today. So, get on there and ask some questions. If you're already a member, get on there, ask some questions. The videos are coming out much more frequently now, so I'll actually be able to get to the questions. And if you want to stay up to date with all of the Ukraine news and the global news, you can follow me on Twitter at Squatson and on Telegram, Kalibrated. So I really appreciate you guys, and have a good day. Bye.